This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us. We have a very special treat because we have Holli Emore here, and most of y'all, if not all of y'all, know her. And she's also the new chair for Interfaith Partners of South Carolina. But she is here to talk about the trip that she and Clyde went on, the Nile Pilgrimage, very recently, and I'm super excited to hear about that. So Holli, the floor is yours.
Okay. We often do a bit of a greet and check-in at this point, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started on this tonight so that we don't run too much over time. Deborah Burris, as I live and breathe, all the way from Arkansas, right? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is my interfaith group. Deborah, can I say how I know you?
Absolutely, yes.
Deborah's one of my pagan colleagues. She's a professor of earth science,
Physics and astronomy.
Yeah, way beyond earth science. She's awesome. Anyway, so I have about 3 monitors in front of me, and I have learned that sharing the screen in those kind of circumstances can be a little bit tricky. So I hope you'll bear with me while I do my best to make that happen correctly. And I know Clyde will be able to speak up as well.
Do you want me to pull out notes in case you misidentify something?
Oh, I'm sure I'll misidentify something. Yeah, that's very likely. Let's see. All right. Do y'all see?
While Holli's doing that, I'll just mention that we've often said, now, was that there or there? And I have to sometimes pull out our calendar and look at where I made notes on. No, that was this place.
Okay, so are you all seeing a picture of us and it says arrival in Cairo?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Okay, got it right this time. Well, we were blessed in that we're not people of means, but something came our way a couple of years ago, and we sat down and talked about it and decided this was not going to add measurably to our retirement fund. And if we were ever going to go to Egypt, this was the time to do it. A lot of you know that Clyde and I are Kemetic in practice, which is a Egyptian-based spirituality, contemporary paganism, but modeled around what we know of ancient Egypt. So this really was a pilgrimage for us. And I have to say, after nearly literally 48 hours of travel and getting there, and then the same thing coming back, it really was not a vacation. It was absolutely wonderful, but it was very arduous. And I'll mention that several times in here. And if anybody has a violin, you can play for me. That's even better. So we flew into Cairo. We did not do any of the Delta North area. That we were there almost 2 weeks. This is Cairo. The nighttime shot was a little zingy, but that's kind of the way we felt. The traffic in Cairo, I can't remember how many million people live there, but it's something like 28. It's a lot of people. So it's a huge, huge metropolis. And the traffic, in fact, this daytime picture is just, there are no cars there. I don't even remember where that must have been, but we were very struck by, you know, there would be donkeys going down a 6-lane interstate and people pulling over to stop and talk to each other. I see the Bohanians laughing. Is this typical? I don't know. We were just, oh my gosh. And people drive like it's nuts. It makes South Carolina look like child's play, and they blow horns at each other a lot. But what we realized is that we never saw an accident in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of occasionally, even we as passengers would go, how are we really going to get through that little space? But it wasn't to say, get out of my way. It was to say, watch out, I'm back here. And so we never saw road rage. We didn't see accidents. Oh, I should have started by saying, this is not a tour of ancient Egyptian monuments. You'll see a lot of those, but we were just, we wanted to share the journey aspect and show some things that you don't always see in pictures. And I wish that I could show you some videos I have of just riding through tiny villages and the countryside, because it's not something that many Americans experience. We'll get back to more of that. Now, this is our hotel that we woke up in the next day. And if you look closely in the photo on the right, you can see what's down the street. Oh my gosh, it's Khufu's Great Pyramid. This is, of course, near Giza. And this is sort of, if I were to look off to my left in that previous picture, that's the new Grand Egyptian Museum, which has already been more than 10 years being built. And it's just fabulous. Of course, it's not open yet, but all of the Tut treasures are in there now. So yes, we did go to the pyramids. That was the first day they took us out there. And you're going to see me with a lot of mashed hair. The vain person that's still in my inner child is going to say, please ignore my hair, because hats and I don't get along. But you need it in the sun. And notice the ground. If you see me hobbling around or talking about the difficulty we had there, you can see why it might have been a little challenging. This is not Myrtle Beach. And a lot of the venues, this is climbing up into the Great Pyramid. And as you can see, it's very uneven, no railings, nothing to hold on to, quite challenging. But we're glad we were there. And close by, of course, here is the Sphinx, which is cut down into the plateau.
Is this Phil?
Holly,
Holly.
wait just a minute.
The next day we went to Saqqara, which is a little bit south of Giza. And this was the site of a gigantic precinct where a pharaoh named Djoser, D-J-O-S-E-R is the way we spell it in English, built a thing we call the stepped pyramid. And Clyde, or anybody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this was the first stone pyramid in Egypt. It's quite old, and it has a very complicated labyrinthine set of tunnels underneath it. There's a misperception that people were buried up inside the pyramid. That's not true. If they were buried there, which a lot of people weren't, Djoser was not buried here, but there were chambers under the pyramid. And there's a religious significance to that, this thing rising up out of the earth. It has to do with a creation myth, and it's referred to as the primordial mound that rose up out of the waters of creation.
Holly, did you climb around in these things?
We did not go down inside that one. You can, some people can. I think we would have had to get a special guide and pay a lot of money to get inside there. I have a friend who's been in there. It's got several miles of tunnels.
The first one that you showed in the previous slide, did you climb up that one?
And into the great pyramid, Khufu's pyramid, yes, we did climb up into that one. To the sarcophagus at the top
King's Chamber.
of that one. Yeah.
Wow.
It just about killed us.
Yeah, I would think.
It's literally a 45-degree angle.
And there were no rails, were there?
There were rails inside, thank goodness, but the opening is just enough to get through.
Ooh,
And it's about 5 stories or more to get
Ah,
up there. And once
whoa.
you start, you just, I mean,
yeah.
if you pass anybody coming back the other way, let's just say you get to know each other very well. They warn you, don't go in if you're claustrophobic.
Right.
Anyway, this is just an assorted picture from, I think, Karnak, but this is the way a lot of the men, maybe most of the men in Egypt dress. They wear this galabia, if they're not in Western attire, and they almost all have these scarves, which they may have wrapped on their head, sort of turban style, or they may have it around their neck, but they're handy for a lot of things, including keeping the sun off of your head. But they have workers like this at all the public monuments. You are expected to tip for those of you who are perhaps considering a trip, and the economy has suffered a great deal. I think they're about 80% dependent on tourism. So Arab Spring just devastated them. And then COVID, just as they were starting to recover, COVID, drove another nail in a potential coffin. But so they're very grateful for all the help they can get. And they were all really nice to us. And I'll come back to the nice stuff. This is back at the stepped pyramid of Djoser. There was a little building, just like a cube outside the pyramid. And I saw 2 holes and I knew what it was. This is called a serdab. And it's this statue of Djoser. If you walk up, you can see their eye holes, and you look inside and there's Djoser looking out at you. And the statue is actually tipped back a little bit so that he can look up at the polar stars for eternity. Those are the stars that don't appear to move much to us. So they're fixed stars. So again, there's religious significance in that. But I will say it's kind of unsettling to walk up to a stone wall and look inside, and there's somebody just maybe 3 feet away looking back at you. This was the area around Saqqara. And you may have noticed there have been things in the news lately. They keep finding all of those bumps are anticipated to be some sort of burials of nobles. But it just takes years and years and years and money to excavate and research all these things. But as you can see, once you get into the desert areas, it really is desert, but it's a rocky desert. I was just intrigued to go by walls and see things that people put in place with their hands thousands of years ago. I hope you don't mind that I indulged myself in some odd pictures like this. I remember our guide kind of like, aren't you coming? What's your picture of? That wall. I want a picture of that wall. Same thing here. This is Djoser's pyramid again. And you can see that even though this is, gosh, it's got to be at least 2500 BCE. Although I cannot remember without looking it up. So these stones, I think, aren't they limestone, honey? And limestone does dissolve in acid rain. But, if you can imagine what it was like when they were put in place, the accuracy is amazing. The engineering is incredible. This was our reward. Meals there were fabulous, and they're all everything we ate outdoors while we were there because it's beautiful weather. This was a tomb nearby. I don't remember which one. As you can see, we had to stoop to walk through that little passage. This was a tomb I popped in here. Some of you will appreciate this and some of you may not. Do you see the faint painting on the right? They call this the tomb of the 2 brothers, but even our Muslim guide said, and yes, we do wonder whether they were a gay couple or not. We don't really know. but it's a little unusual. It's the only tomb in Egypt like this, but it's just very beautifully done. Wherever you see the relief so that it's raised, that means they've carved away the background. And you can identify species of fish and livestock and plants in all of this Egyptian art. It's very detailed. Although I'm not sure it's very realistic to have these men hunting hippos. Hippos are pretty dangerous. There's another picture of the two men there.
Huh.
Here we are going into the tomb of Teti. Again, it's next to the pyramid of Djoser, and the pyramid of Unas is also adjacent. Unas and Teti have the oldest religious texts in the world, in history, that we have. The Vedic texts are said to be about the same age, but we only have more recent copies of Vedic texts. This is the original. So I have been fascinated. These were the origin of things like the Book of the Dead and various other afterlife texts that came along afterwards. So I was very keen to see this for myself. What was a surprise was to find out that this was not as big as I thought from photos I'd seen. And that was the case. A lot of things were far bigger or far smaller than I expected. And this is, you can see the hieroglyphs on that far wall in the photo on the right. And the entire place is this series of prayers and rituals that are to be recited when somebody is being buried in there, the king, Teti, or Unas, obviously. Well, after a few days in Cairo, they flew us down to Luxor because they said, you don't want to ride the train here. And we said, okay, whatever. And we were astonished to be put in the old Winter Palace Hotel. Now, we were in the new wing they call the Winter Garden. It's a very, very famous hotel. All the, Agatha Christie, prime ministers, Lord Carnarvon, everybody stayed here back in the day. And to walk through the old part of the hotel is like a museum. So we felt really, really special. This is from our balcony, looking over these gardens that are about 150 years old. This doesn't really do them justice, but it was just, this was the most refreshing part of the trip for us. And you can see there we had a moon that would rise in front of our balcony each night that we were there. It was so neat. Here we are right across the street from the Winter Palace at a restaurant that we went to often. That's our Luxor and South guide, Mamdouh, long-suffering Mamdouh. And right there by the water, it was wonderful. All the food was fabulous. This is Karnak. This is Karnak, isn't it, honey? Yeah. Going in, and it's true. You can see all the pictures in the world, but when you get there, you have to strain to look up, and it's bigger than you think. It's just amazing. And the weight that these things are carrying, because all of this that we're looking at would have had slabs over the roof at one time. So they had to come up with some pretty funky engineering to be able to do this. I won't go into that tonight, but I'll just say it seems brilliant to me. There are only 2 obelisks left there. There were either 4 or 6 originally. One fell over during an earthquake, maybe 200s BC. And a couple have been given away over the centuries.
Holly, the picture on the left, I like calling attention to, because the colors in the paintings, those are original. Those are like thousands of years old. And
Mhm.
I have to, I have to paint our front porch every 2 years. And yet these paintings have lasted for thousands of years.
Yeah, and these particular photographs have not been cleaned. It's taking years and years to do that. We'll have pictures of that in a minute. But yeah, the original paints were in ochre, malachite, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and I forget how they made the white. So the colors, when you see something that hasn't been messed up, are just stunning. Everywhere you go, there's scaffolding, people working. So this kind of work, if you're ever inclined to give to an archaeological expedition or dig or something, it means a huge amount to the local economy. We, well, I won't try to go back, but we talked about, hang on, Carolyn, we talked, I know I had a friend who had funded some work here that we'll see in a minute, behind the scenes at Karnak. And he was just shocked. My friend has money. And when he found out what they needed and why they needed it, and that it was an immediate need, he just pulled out his wallet and gave them some cash on the spot. And we've talked about how we could do some micro fundraising. But for example, there was to take one of those huge columns in, say, one of the temples and get it all cleaned and restored, not repainted, but just to get all the years of grime and people who've lived under there at times or sheltered their cattle there and burned oil lamps, to get all that off and have them as close to the original as possible. $2,000. Well, think about in the US economy, that's probably a year's worth of work for about 4 people. Pretty amazing. So at some point, Mamdouh peeled us off out of the public area and we went through this opening, and behold, what we see on those History Channel specials is there's this huge complex that was Karnak, and most of it is behind the scenes. They've spent many years and will spend many years more trying to put together the puzzle that is all the broken pieces that they have found. There are a lot of stories behind that too. Again, I took a picture because these are ancient bricks, mud bricks with ancient straw in them. I'm sorry, Carolyn, you had your hand up.
I did, because I don't remember what the original purpose of Karnak was.
It was a temple complex, and it was the center of the cult of Amun.
Okay.
So from who we get the word Amen. It's true.
Okay.
And that this was the big opposition that Akhenaten had when he wanted to shut things down. This was a very, very rich, powerful, over many centuries time area. They probably employed about 2,000 people and had 200 living on site at the time of their height. So they just, there's a shallow water table, and the water leaching up into these things is eroding monuments all over Egypt. If you're anywhere near the Nile, that's a problem. So that's, I took some of these pictures thinking about, possible future fundraising. And that's why they've got stuff up on platforms off the ground or even on wooden runners like these timbers. And there you can see why it's worth trying to put it together. So there are people in there who are digitizing images of things and then using software to try and reconstruct things first and then put them together. I just thought this tree was wonderful. And who knows how old it is. Look at that. And it's out in the middle of the desert. There is a temple to the god Ptah, who was a Memphis area or up towards Cairo area creator god. And his consort was the goddess Sekhmet, to whom I happen to be devoted. I'm a devotee and priestess of Sekhmet. So how did I do that? So this was closed to the public, but I had let Mamdouh know that this was one of the two things that were on my must-see list. And he paid some extra bakshish to this guy. We did too. And he unlocked the little chapel of Sekhmet to let us in. It was
Wow.
pitch dark. And Mamdouh was good enough. I didn't talk religion with him in particular, not much anyway. But he left us alone in there. He said, would 15 minutes be enough? And I said, really, 5 minutes is fine. And I really appreciate that because they're kind of funky about security. So it was pitch dark, but our camera flash lit it up, and that's here again, you can see work in progress. You can see the damage that's happened. And most of the time, say these pieces that had fallen out of the ceiling, they're probably on the ground or the floor underneath, and they just need some help getting put back. Now, Luxor is what they call their city, but the temple complex at Luxor was sort of a counterpart to Karnak. Karnak is up the road about 2 miles. Luxor, we didn't realize that at the time. We could have walked over there in like 60 seconds from our hotel. It was right near us. And because Christianity moved in, and I think it was the Emperor Justinian maybe who outlawed all pagan religions at some point in the late 200s, early 300s of this era. And so all of this was shut down. In fact, I'm told that they killed a lot of the priests. Well, so here's all this wealth of buildings all over the country. The poor people of Egypt live on top of a gigantic archaeological site, which is a treasure for the whole world, but it's rather a burden. And over the years, they've used these buildings for stables. People have lived in there at times. Bedouins might camp in there for a few days. And you see here, this is an active mosque, which is inside Luxor. And there were people going in and out of it the day we were there. When you got further back in, this doesn't look very Egyptian, does it? That's because that was a Roman temple that during the Roman occupation, they built in there. Then, after the pagan religions were all outlawed, there are crosses carved in there. You can see little, I would say, crusader-looking crosses carved in a number of the sites we visited. More work everywhere. And these were the ladies that they're very proud of the fact that pretty much all the kind of cleaning that we've been talking about, where they reveal the colors and the hieroglyphs and images underneath, is done by women. So these women let me take their picture on their, I guess, brunch break or something. Now here's where you can start to see more of the color. Some of this has been cleaned, some has not. This is in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, which is north of Luxor, but still along the Nile. I found this to be quite beautiful. Those of you who know anything about Egyptian images, can y'all see my mouse when I move it around?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, you can see there is the Eye of Horus, which has strong symbolism. Boats. I teach a whole class on this. You see boats everywhere in these temples, and there were model boats everywhere. And this is Hathor. You can always tell Hathor because she has cow ears, and they thought cows were the most beautiful animal in the world. but her nose has been chiseled off of all of these capitals. It's really a shame because they're just beautiful. And Mamdouh said it was Christian Slater who did that.
And I'll also mention that in some of the columns, not only here but other places, but besides the faces being chiseled off, there were also Coptic crosses carved into the columns.
Yeah, carved over. Yeah. And I took a lot of pictures of just openings and doorways and angles. There's Clyde with Mamdouh. And I think each of those squares up there on the left are the ruler that built this in front of a different deity. Sometimes you had different rulers documented. Anybody who had something to do with building or adding to or improving the building would have made sure to tell their story in it. Here's some more. You can see these colors are a little duller. I found this interesting that there are these little openings that just big enough for a small body to shimmy through, and at odd places, you know, like up there on the wall, there was one that we got to go down into, and there were paintings on the walls down in a corridor down there. And I asked, what were these for? And he said, it was a cache, like C-A-C-H-E. He said, put things in there. I said, do you mean like storage or to hide things? He said, probably both. We would get up when we were in Luxor, usually around dawn, and be out going to a water taxi to go over to the West Bank. So here we are. There are hundreds and hundreds of these all over the place. In fact, we saw a party, looked like a hen party one day. All these women were out partying in the middle of the afternoon. They were cute. So this is driving over to the Valley of the Kings. And again, the landscape is just, I don't know, there's something about it that just grips you once you, or it did me, once you get there. And if anybody came in late, it's just, again, to say I wasn't intending with this to just tell about ancient Egypt, but to tell you about our trip. So those are tomb entrances in those openings behind Mamdouh there, and that's very typical. And they still figure that there are tombs they've not yet found in the Valley of the Kings and other places as well. That's not the Valley of the Kings, but that's a typical opening. And from there, you would just keep going down and down and down and down. Over time, these outcroppings have eroded quite a bit. And at times there are small landslides. So tombs like Tut's may even have been covered up partly by landslides from, there's a storm maybe once a year. They say it rains about once a year, but when it does, it'll come through. This is a wadi. It's a big valley cut through by the water. So the water will come through with a great deal of force. So you see there are a lot of tourists there. There was a rest center there, which was good. We went to see Tut, not because we were all that interested in Tutankhamun, but you know, it seems silly to go there and not go see it, even though it was one more place to climb a few stories down and then back up. And the poor guy, he looks kind of pathetic. And I just got through reading an article. His mummy has been really messed up since he was found 100 years ago in November. His body's in pieces. It's all in pieces. That's probably why he's covered up. Also for decency's sake, it is a human remain. This was a real person. And I found it's not the first time I've seen mummies, but it was a little bit disturbing. And the tomb really is unremarkable. Everything you see on these TV specials, yeah, is really small. I mean, that's it. Why are you just...
Yeah, I was just going to jump in here and there are a few people I've told how small Tut's tomb was. And the response comes back to me is, well, wasn't he a really small person? And but that's not the point. The point is that Mamdouh had a saying, referred to, he'd either refer to made in the shade or a rush job. And Tut's tomb was a rush job. When one became pharaoh, they started having their tomb created. And so hopefully one had a long time to have their tomb prepared. Tut didn't have that luxury. He died young. So they had to do a rush job on finishing his tomb. Therefore, it is small.
Yeah, and there's a remarkable lack of religious texts. The pictures are not, it's just, yeah, there's a lot of aspects about it, but that's probably enough said. And when you see a tomb like this, you see why Tut's is considered so unremarkable. And this is just the entryway. That's just going down into it.
Can I ask a question about Tut's tomb?
Yeah.
Was it, there are, the Indiana Jones and that kind of thing that make it hard to find where within the pyramid a tomb lies. Were there any hints about that from your
Yeah.
guides?
Yeah, we pretty much know where people would have been buried in almost every case, except Tutankhamun's. Tomb raiders had gotten in there in ancient times and would rip out the mummy, or they would wedge the sarcophagus lid and then set a fire inside to get it to crack open. And so the mummy would be damaged, but the mummies were buried with all kinds of amulets and jewelry inside those wrappings. So the tomb robbers were usually after that kind of stuff. But yeah, we usually find a sarcophagus, or the layout of the tomb pretty much tells you where it would have been. And sometimes you find body parts. By the way, see, there's a boat again.
And this one on the left, I can't remember, I could be wrong in saying whose it is, but this is, I believe, one of the Ramses pharaohs. And that's the corridor going down into his burial chamber. It's not up in a pyramid, it's down, dug into the ground.
And a lot of that was security, but there were also some religious overtones to that. Those of you who have attended a Lights of Newt ceremony with Temple of Cyrene in the past, we're going to see Newt here in a minute. Well, she's in the background there, but we'll see her in just a minute. See, here's another boat over here. And this image of the beetle, that's a religious symbol having to do with becoming or manifesting. Part of me, I'm pretty sure this is Ramses VI. It doesn't matter. Part of me is glad that I didn't get to go on this trip. If I could only go once in my life. I've been studying hieroglyphs for 10 years. And so I know what a lot of this meant. And that made it so much more meaningful for me. I was really grateful for that. It wasn't just pretty pictures or exotic images for me. Every detail of anything the Egyptians carved or painted meant something. There's a boat again. Snakes are a big deal. There's Hathor, see her cow ears. I'll just mention, since this looks kind of unusual, that whenever you see an afterlife text and you see these kind of pods or cocoons, those are people kind of in suspended animation in water, waiting to be resurrected. And these people without the heads probably did something they shouldn't have. They were alive. Okay, so here's Newt. She's the sky. She was the mother of Osiris and Isis. And every night she swallowed she's on her tiptoes and hands arched over the earth. And on one end, you see where she's swallowing the sun, and these red balls are the sun passing through her body all night long. And then at dawn, she gives birth again. Nefertari, this was the one I really wanted to see, and it was closed for many years, so we were really lucky that it has reopened. It's just gorgeous. They call this the Sistine Chapel of Egypt. It just looks like somebody finished the painting yesterday. There's Newt swallowing over here. You see her? We saw Newt everywhere. This was a fascinating place. It was a workers' village that was in existence for about 300 years during the height of the mainly New Kingdom pharaohs. And the Valley of the Kings is on the other side of the hills. And they lived here in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh funded them, supplied the water, food, everything. And their families, everybody was out here. And these were the craftsmen who cut the rock tombs out, who made the sarcophagi and treasures that went inside, jewelers, all kinds of crafts. And on the other side, like I guess to my back here, is their necropolis or cemetery. And in the past, they all had these little baby pyramids over them. But this was the workers' area. And because they're the ones that made all the tombs for the pharaohs, they were able to do these beautiful little jewel box tombs of their own. And I've seen pictures of them and always wanted to go there, and felt very lucky to get to see them. This is the Temple of Seti at Abydos. For those of you who've ever heard of Dorothy Eady or Seti, this is where she lived most of her life and tended the temple. I also found it's not all been cleaned, so you don't have those brilliant colors, but there was a peacefulness there I really enjoyed. And this is the Osirian. Sometime if you want, you can ask me the story of how we came to call our group here Temple Osirian. And I'd love to have gotten to go down in there, but as you can see, it's a little tricky, and we would have had to pay several $100s a piece to get access. We did figure out that with money, you can go almost anywhere in Egypt, but you have to know the right people and have the right amount of cash. So we did our homage from up here. This is going back out of the Temple of Seti. Then we got on the boat. A dahabeah is a wonderful way to travel. These are antique sort of boats that have been, some of these probably are about 100 years old and refurbished. They're very small. And it was a wonderful way to see the Nile, relax a little bit, and we would stop along the way. And there was just a very small group on here. There were only 5 other passengers. And here you can see it really is very rural. There's a cow out in the middle of the water. The white spots are egrets, I think. This person's probably fishing for their supper. This is, you always saw people with their donkeys and occasionally a cow or goat, you know, walking places. There's a great deal of poverty in Egypt. And I don't know if this is offensive to say or not, but I don't know a better way to say it. We felt like we were in a third world country most of the time. And I think that was very good for us as Americans to be immersed in that. And people are poor, but we found that everywhere we went, people were so kind and polite, and they really seemed to defer to us as older. I mean, I could see a difference in how they treated us next to, say, other outside of Egypt visitors. So that was quite charming, I have to say.
Holly,
Uh-huh.
I was just going to ask, what do you think is the cause for such poverty there? I know, you know, of course, in ancient times,
It's
Egypt
very
was
rich. Mhm.
wealthy and, yeah, it really was. And now it isn't. So what do you
Colonial
think
powers.
causes that to be a
Colonial
country?
powers.
Really?
They ruled themselves magnificently for probably, let's see, from probably at least 3,500 BC. I mean, we got records going back that far. So we know it was before that, till Cleopatra and the Romans took over. But even Cleopatra was a Ptolemy. So you know, the Persians had already come in there and invaded, then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then eventually the Islamic movement came in and kind of took over. And then at some point, the Ottoman Empire, basically Egypt and everything in the Levant, all of that became part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. So people have been bleeding them dry for a long time. And then you had the French and the English.
Following World War II, yeah. And then a lot of these places were, not to be misleading, it was, I think a lot of it was cultural. And then some of the other places that appeared third world, so to speak, were rural areas. So there is a lot of agriculture in Egypt.
Rich agriculture.
There's a huge amount of dry, arid desert, but along the Nile, it is still very fertile. The one downfall of that is, as Holly has mentioned, the water table and the saline water is seeping up into the sandstone. So a lot of the structures are deteriorating from the bottom up because that salt water is just eating away at the sandstone.
But yeah, the colonialism has definitely been an issue. So they've been struggling to get their balance ever since they gained independence in, I want to say, 60s. So it hasn't been that long. And they've got a pretty right-wing ruler right now. They're supposed to be a democratic country, but it's clear they don't think it's a democracy. So yeah, that's the source of a great deal of the poverty. I shared this because I just was charmed and delighted by all the birds and cats and dogs that live in the temples. And everybody just sort of steps around them. They don't look unhealthy. These are feral cats driving us crazy when we had the supper out on the riverbank. But I took this picture, and again, Mamdouh was puzzled about why I was dragging my feet. But I couldn't help but think, from my Christian background of Psalm 84, and even the sparrows found a nest for a young in your courts and your temples. I can't quote it anymore, but I thought this really would make a great meme.
Holly, are cats still revered the way that they used to be in Egypt?
I don't know how much they were ever revered.
Okay.
It's hard to say. Bast was a very minor goddess. We don't know much of anything about her. I think they're just kind of ubiquitous. Snakes were revered probably a lot more than cats were, but Nada, our tour guide up in Cairo, she seemed very proud of the fact that people love their animals, and there would be a dog just lying in the dirt around, say, the Great Pyramids, and we just kind of have to step around it. They'd be lying there taking a nap or looking up at us, and it was just perfectly comfortable with thousands of people walking by. It was quite interesting. I just happen to like this bird. I'd never seen one. I'd seen them in books. It's called a hoopoe, and there were hoopos everywhere. I just thought they were cool. We're running out of time, but in the way that we have Liberty Bells or Ben Franklin or, iconography like that say America to us, the Egyptians have adopted a lot of this ancient sacred symbolism. Here's a tour company. This was not the one we used, by the way. We love the one we used. We'd love to recommend them. And that's the Jed pillar, and you see that in their logo. This is Egypt Air. Guess who that is? Horus. And see, there I am standing by a statue of Horus. This is the Egyptian hieroglyph for the word for gold, noob. Noob. Let me think. Where have I heard noob as in Nubia? Look at this. They've worked it into a new logo for the airport. I wish I could have gotten the whole thing, but you can see there it is, Nubia, land of gold. And children and families, they all wanted to talk to us and get their picture made with us and high five and shake our hands. And we just said, okay, we've had all our COVID shots, we threw caution to the winds. Even these older fellas over here asked if I would mind letting them take a picture with their son or brothers or whatever. So they all ended up getting in the picture. And it just felt that way. I'm sure that they get tired. I've lived in a tourist area. I have relied on the tourist dollar before. I know how tiresome it can be and annoying. But we were just so blessed, and we found that people were just so kind. Everybody wants to know, did we have a religious experience over there? And I want to show you this picture. This is Set, who at some point began to be thought of as really more in modern times as sort of an evil bad guy. He did kill his brother Osiris, but what's that between siblings? This is Horus, Osiris's son. And eventually, in, of course, sacred time, Horus becomes Osiris's successor, and they fight for centuries over the upper and lower parts of Egypt. And eventually, this is resolved. And every little line in this thing says something. This thing in the middle, this is a hieroglyph. Of course, these say something. This is somebody's name. Let's see. I'd have to look that up. But look how they're pulling against each other at the same time that the knot is pulling them together. And this is to commemorate, and we saw this motif in every temple. This is to commemorate when they came to peace with each other and decided to share the rule of Egypt. So the reason I show you that is because I was too tired and hurt in too many places most of the time over there. It was just a challenge to try and keep up. Yes, it was meaningful, but it wasn't like I was standing around having, ecstatic experiences all the time. But what did happen was when we landed at JFK, as exhausted as we were, and I can tell you we were, I felt the way it feels to pull a needle and thread through fabric. I felt like we were coming together, and Clyde and I both feel like we have a second home now. We'd love to go back. We'd love to have a little house and live there part of the year. Luxor preferably. So a friend told me, he said, they say that pagans should observe or honor the gods of the place where they are or where they're from. And I've said, but I don't belong anywhere. I'm European American and I have no ties with anything pre-Christian that I know of. And I actually have traced some of my genealogy actually back to Roman times, to Greece and Syria and Egypt and Northern Africa. So, if you're looking for that kind of claim, yes, I've got it, but that's not really the point. And he said, be sure that when you encounter your gods over there, that you bring them back here so that they're honored in this land as well. And they're no longer gods of a different place. They're your gods wherever you are. So I know if you're monotheistic and you don't know anything about paganism, that may make no sense, but I wanted to share it for those of you who would wonder and appreciate. And we do feel connected. We feel a connection now. And we're very grateful for that experience. So back to the pilgrimage part, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And between jet lag, which we didn't know was a thing, we thought that was just getting used to the time difference. We didn't know that you actually get kind of sick. And I fell, damaged some ribs. We all got the travel tummy at one point, and something else health-wise going on. So it did become kind of an endurance thing for us, but that made it a more intense experience too. Everything's pretty much burned into our psyche, and it's a wonderful memory. So Clyde, it's 8:03. Do you want to add anything before we open for other questions?
I will say that with our pilgrimage, as it turned into it, to me, it really didn't start out as a pilgrimage, but that's what it became. And we were very, very fortunate that even though the tour company we chose limits their groups to no more than 12, at the time we went, we were the only two on our tour.
It's just us.
It was just the two of us and our guide. And I think that was an added blessing that we had.
Yeah. Yeah, we got very special attention, and we were accompanied everywhere we went. They took care of tickets, accommodations, all transportation, everything. So sometimes people ask me, and so I have put the name of the company in the chat box because they were fantastic, and I have friends that have used them at least a dozen times, and they were less expensive than everybody else. So that was a plus. They customized everything. They said, where do you want to go? How much time do you want to spend there? How much money do you want to spend? We've worked it all out. Does anybody have comments or questions?
Well, Holly, I'm sure glad you guys got to go and you enjoyed it. And we enjoyed that, your experience and your sharing. Thank you for spending this time with us.
And thank you for
I think that, no matter which faith we belong to, we all trace ourselves to that era.
Mhm.
And so learning about it helps us understand why we believe in certain things
Yeah.
and are, part of our journey. So thank you.
Amen, brother. I'm with you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mary? You're muted.
I'm sorry. You said everywhere you went, the food was wonderful. What kind of food do they eat there?
Lots of fresh vegetables and fruit and rice dishes. Now they fed us grilled chicken and lamb and I guess beef, but I figured that was kind of a luxury and we felt overfed. A lot of tomato and vegetable dishes and soups. I avoid cooking 99% of the time, and I came home and bought an Egyptian everyday home cooking book. And I can do the rice thing now.
Inspired.
Yeah.
How long
And
was
tahini? Yeah, tahini.
How long was your trip?
About 2 weeks. And if we were doing it again, we would definitely stop somewhere in Europe halfway. It was really too much. You cannot sleep on a plane anymore. And first class tickets, when we first went online a year in advance, it was $13,000 a seat. Those were the cheapest we could find. So we said, well, we'll just take a sleeping pill on the plane and chill. Well, sorry, you get on a plane with 300 and some families and soccer World Cup players. Yes, there were some gorgeous men on board.
And of course, with the excitement going over, I don't think we felt the jet lag as badly as we did coming back.
Yeah.
Coming back, there's about a 3.5 hour flight from Cairo to Doha. And then on our return trip, we had a rather lengthy 5-hour layover in Doha. And then from Doha to JFK was 14.5 hours in the air. So then a little layover in New York and then the flight back to Charlotte. So, but those 2 legs, Cairo to Doha and then particularly Doha to JFK, definitely wiped me out.
Doha was because we flew Qatar Airlines and they were great. And this is the nice part I said I'd get to. It's important for me to add, people were so nice everywhere we went. You know how miserable it can be on a plane in America these days, and how we keep having violent incidents and people angry with each other. This did not happen on our flights. In fact, people were very tolerant of Clyde and me bumbling around as we would try to get up. You didn't know this, honey, but you put your hand down on the poor guy in front of you a couple of times. I'd see him look up, but they never said anything. And the way people handled their little ones, never heard anybody yelling at a child or scolding. They would just deal with them, and the granddads would be helping with the toddlers. So it was just really sweet to be in a completely different culture. And yeah, refreshing.
I really got a sense from you, the truth of what you said about pilgrimage. It was far more than a journey. It truly was a pilgrimage. And it shows right now in both of you. And I think our life also can be a pilgrimage.
Yes.
And that's our invitation.
Yes. Yes, because I know that I probably will never go back there, and most people will not get to. But we all make a journey in our hearts. So I'm glad you said that, Sister Nancy. I don't want us to wrap up tonight without my noticing that there's a certain predecessor in this room right now whose footsteps are going to be really hard to fill. And Cheryl, it's so good to see you tonight. I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but
It's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for sharing this magnificent experience with us. I'm so glad I was able to come in and see your amazing photos and learn from you.
thank you.
And
Thank
Cheryl,
you.
here
On
also-
behalf of the whole group, thank you for all you've done for the last several years. So no, it wasn't just while you were president, vice chair, and we owe you a great debt of gratitude.
Oh, well, thank you, Holly. Thank you for leading the ship to its next chapter.
Anybody else?
I had a quick question about the art, and I think you like art history as well. Was some of the art that you saw? Had you studied it before going over there, or did you find new things that you'd never seen?
Well, both. I have studied it a lot. I actually have a bachelor's in art history, so I'm familiar with some things from that. But you know, the writing is art to us, and when they call it picture writing, it's true. You know, every picture tells a story. So Mamdouh was great. He actually is a professor at a nearby college as well. And so when he found out how interested we are in all of this and that I sort of read hieroglyphs, he would say, okay, Holly, come on over here. This is a test. And he would say, now see this? What does that say? And anyway, he would explain all kinds of things to us and point out who's this. And you know, he would also point to things like a courtyard we were in where there's a whole row of statues, look like they were probably pharaohs, and all the heads are missing. He'd say, guess where that one is? Say, lost, stolen. He'd say, in the British Museum. How about that one? That's in the Oriental Institute at Chicago. You know, so now, to be fair, this is not all stuff we've stolen. The Egyptians themselves, this has been a great source of cash for a few hundred years. And they often wanted to curry favor with a foreign government by giving an obelisk to the city of London or the city of Paris. But we've also carted things out wholesale, and just like we did to the Native Americans in this country.
Also, there were a lot of places, and you may have noticed it in some of the photographs that we shared, that there are just blank blocks. There are no carving or anything on it. And we'd ask the question, well, what happened to the one that was here? And Mamdouh would tell us, oh, they probably took it to build another building with.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of recycled blocks around Egypt.
Yeah. Did I see your hand, Rebecca? Hey.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much. The pictures and the descriptions were just wonderful, wonderful. I'm just curious about what you're teaching at Cherry Hill right now, and if you're following up with any of this, and if so, how we could be a part of that.
Well, I do a little 4-week course called Per Ankh, which is the name, it translates house of life. So a temple might be called Per Ankh, but it was also used to indicate a library or place of teaching. So, and the subtitle is something like Ancient Egyptian Spirituality for Today. And we can talk. We're about 2/3 of the way through it at Cherry Hill right now. We offer it periodically. Let's see. Yeah, there you are, Mel. I'm just looking for you.
I'm right here.
you want to wrap us up and invite people to the next one?
Sure. Thank
And
you
I'll
so
cede the
much.
floor.
Appreciate you coming out, and Holly, thank you so much for sharing with us. And we do have the Lizard's Thicket first Tuesday of the month. So that's coming up. I've already put the event up on our Facebook. So we would love to have you come out for that. Does anyone have any questions for me about that or anything? Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.